which Waldorf school now?
Four-Winds Waldorf.
Four-Winds Waldorf. If I had my way about it, I would have all children in the country in Waldorf schools, and I would have all Waldorf schools practicing heart math, freeze frame, educational kinesiology, and education through music. Those three things added to Waldorf, I tell you, it would be a different planet. How many of you are familiar with Heart Math Institute in California? Great. And we have representatives from there. How many of you are familiar with Dale and Paul Dennison's educational kinesiology? There is a major tragedy. Believe me, this is one of the most remarkable discoveries I think has ever been made about starting off with dysfunctional children, and then you realize it helps all children and all adults a great deal. I just asked my hostess here, Nancy Hill, to every 45 minutes get me to shut up somehow or other and do a quick educational kinesiology exercise to wake up our brains, because I never think of taking a break. But Nancy says she's going to remind me every 45 minutes tonight to shut up, and we'll do a quick educational kinesiology. I want to start off by talking about probably, and some of you have heard my rap before, I'm sure Dave Nez has. I wish he would leave so I could use my same jokes again. But heard my rap about some of the most extraordinary and exciting news to come out of science in the late 20th century had to do with the fact that a mother's emotional state while she's carrying the infant in her womb plays a profound role in the shape, character, nature, quality, and actual functioning of the growth of the brain in the infant in her womb. The mother's emotional shape enters into as a profound influence on the kind of brain that infant is going to be born into the world with. A woman who's given a safe, protective, nurturing environment, who feels loved and wanted and feels good about herself and all rosy-dozy, will give birth to an infant with an enlarged forebrain and a reduced-sized hindbrain. Okay? Now I'm going to have to explain these terms in a minute, and I'll do that as quickly as possible. A woman who is in a state of anxiety or is a good citizen, feels terrorized all the time. A woman who feels very bad about herself, feels unsafe, isn't taken care of, etc., will give birth to an infant with an enlarged hindbrain and a sharply reduced-sized forebrain, just exactly the opposite. So now I'm going to try very briefly run through forebrain and hindbrain so it'll make some sense. First of all, our forebrain is the latest evolutionary structures of our brain. I've got kind of a picture of one here. Wait a minute. And I want to make sure that you can see these, not only if they're in focus, but you can see it. Now, can you see that all right, or do I need to hike it up? That's okay? All right, now if we look at this, we'll see that there are three different brain structures on this. Actually, there are four, but this one shows three. Brain of action, this is called the ancient reptilian defensive mechanisms in our body. The brain of feeling, relationship, affection, etc., and a brain of thinking. Those are the evolutionary structures of the brain. I'm going to run through that in a big hurry in a minute also. And if a woman is feeling good about herself and warm and safe and protected while she's carrying her young in her womb, she'll give birth to an infant with the latest, a large forebrain, which means later the evolutionary structures of the brain, the late evolutionary structures of the brain for thinking and feeling and emotion and all will be much larger, and the ancient brain of action and defense will be much smaller. And the exact opposite, if she is feeling in a non-protected, no safe space, unloved, unwanted, etc., in any way, she'll give birth to an infant with an enlarged, what we call reptilian brain, action brain, and a much reduced-sized thinking brain. All right? Now, when I read that, and I've been hearing about this from biologist Bruce Lipton for a long time, but it hadn't been all put together, I said, this has to be the most exciting information that's ever hit us. What would any reasonable, it seems to me, government, this is 1998, any reasonable government do if they heard that a mother who was in a strong, secure, emotional state while she's carrying a child gives birth to an infant with far more capacity for intelligence, creativity, and all the good things of life? What would you think anybody would do? Why, immediately they would start and pour a lot of money into what? Pregnant women, to make sure they all feel safe, secure, wanted, happy, etc. Why? Because you'd have a higher evolutionary structure of brain and a smaller ancient reptilian structure of the brain. To give you an idea of the difference of these brains, years and years ago, old Paul MacLean, he was 40 years head of the brain research and development at the National Institutes of Health, one of the biggest research centers in the world. And Paul MacLean referred to the triune structure of the brain. And I stole this out of one of his books, and then Heart Math Institute stole it out of my book, Evolution's End, and we've all swapped back and forth with this kind of thing. But Paul MacLean spoke of three brains that we have in our head, and this was revolutionary for its own time, 40, 50 years ago. He said the oldest structure is the old reptilian brain. It's really our spinal cord and all these lower hindbrain activities, and part of the cerebellum. And this old reptilian brain is what called Pribram, the great neuroscientist, called the world brain. It gives us our immediate sensory knowledge of a body in the body of the world. It's a very physically oriented brain. It's not only physically oriented, but it's nonverbal. There's no language in it. It's unavailable to any form of language, nonverbal, and it's non-negotiable. Non-negotiable. It operates out of a whole batch of very carefully worked out instincts. So it's an instinctual brain. And by non-negotiable, it means it's going to operate by its instincts and not by any higher intelligence than that. We have governments that are non-negotiable. You know, I bite first, and we'll talk about it later. So this ancient instinctual, and it's our defensive brain. It's our brain that carries within it our major survival instincts, all right? We can call it our survival brain. And everything it does centers around survival. Survival of both self and our host species. The basic sexual brain is this ancient reptilian brain, and so on, and the brain that drives for food, clothing, shelter, etc., etc. Now, when we start looking at the characteristics of the forebrain, I'm going to combine both of them together. Actually, there are three different parts of the forebrain. But in this research, it referred to hindbrain, forebrain, so I'm carrying through on that kind of talk. So here we have the forebrain is made up of the emotional brain that was added much, much later to the old reptilian brain. It took nature hundreds of millions of years to develop that hindbrain, a brain of defense, a sensory system. I think of Max Velleman saying after hundreds of millions of years, the universe created this visual process, a way by which the universe could look at itself. Isn't that a great way to put it? And so this great sensory motor brain came in. But it's a very limited brain, and so then nature goes ahead and builds on that another second story, let's say. And this, of course, is making a cartoon of it. Those of you in brain research can hold your side and roll on the floor laughing, but this cartoon works.